The message arrived on a cold morning in Seoul. One sat in his small apartment, still wearing his uniform from the night shift, when his communication device lit up with the official seal of Earth's government. He knew before opening it that his life was about to change. Officer 1, you have been selected for a diplomatic marriage arrangement with the species. This union will strengthen Earth's position within the galactic confluence. Your service to humanity is noted and appreciated. Preparation begins immediately. He read it 3 times. His hands didn't shake. He had been a soldier for 10 years, serving in humanity's modest defense force. He understood duty, but marriage to an alien, for politics. Across the galaxy, on the glittering capital world of Prime, stood before her father in his grand office. The High Chancellor of the people looked at his daughter with cold calculation in his eyes. "The humans need to feel important," he said, waving his hand dismissively. "This marriage costs us nothing. You will marry one of their officers. It makes them grateful, keeps them compliant, and other species will see our generosity." Felt her throat tighten. "Father, please, anyone but a human. They are so primitive, so weak. I have trained my whole life for a proper union with someone who matters." Her father's voice cut like ice. "This is exactly why you will do this. You need to learn that politics requires sacrifice. The human is nobody. This marriage is symbolic. Fulfill your duty." She wanted to argue more, but the look in his eyes stopped her. She had seen that look before, directed at enemies and rivals. She bowed her head. "Yes, father." The wedding was planned for 3 weeks later. One spent that time reading everything he could about the species. They were tall and elegant, with skin that shimmered in pale blue and silver tones. They had been spacefaring for over 2,000 years. Their society valued art, philosophy, and political maneuvering. They looked at humans the way humans might look at clever animals, interesting perhaps, but not equals. Earth's media exploded with opinions. Some called one a hero, a bridge between species. Others said he was being used, humiliated, turned into a token, gathered outside government buildings. One ignored all of it. He had his orders. His mother called him the night before he left Earth. "You don't have to do this," she said, her voice breaking. "They can't force you." "I know," one replied softly, "but if this helps Earth even a little, it's worth it." "What about love? What about your own life?" He smiled, though she couldn't see it through the audio-only call. "I'm a soldier, Mom. I stopped thinking about my own life a long time ago." The journey to Prime took 6 days on a confluence transport ship. One shared the vessel with diplomats and officials, all of whom avoided talking to him. He spent the time in his cabin, reviewing military tactics and strategic theory. It helped him not think about what was coming. Prepared in her own way, she attended the required cultural briefings about humans, sitting through presentations about Earth's history and customs. The instructor spoke about humans with barely concealed amusement. "They still have wars among themselves," he noted. "Can you imagine? In this modern age?" The other in the room laughed. Didn't. She felt a growing sense of dread in her stomach. When one's ship arrived at Prime, he was taken directly to the diplomatic quarter. The city was beautiful in a way that made Earth's greatest achievements look crude. Buildings floated on anti-gravity platforms. Light seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. The air tasted clean and slightly sweet. He was given quarters attached to what would be his and shared residence. The rooms were large and cold, decorated in style with flowing curves and soft colors. It felt like living in an art gallery. They met for the first time 2 hours before the ceremony, entered the preparation room where one waited in his formal uniform. She was tall, nearly a head taller than him, with skin that gleamed like pearl. Her eyes were large and dark, her features sharp and elegant. She was objectively beautiful, but when she looked at him, he saw only disgust barely hidden behind practiced courtesy. "I am," she said in perfect but accented English. "I suppose you are one." "Yes," he replied simply. He had planned to say more, something polite or warm, but her tone killed the words in his throat. "Let us be clear," she continued, her voice tight. "This marriage is political theater, nothing more. I will perform my duties in public. In private, we will maintain separate lives. Do you understand?" One met her eyes steadily. "I understand perfectly." Something flickered in her expression, surprise maybe that he didn't argue or plead, but it vanished quickly. "Good. The ceremony begins soon. Try not to embarrass yourself." The wedding took place in a grand hall filled with representatives from across the confluence. One recognized faces from news broadcasts, senators, military commanders, corporate leaders. They watched with expressions ranging from curiosity to amusement to outright mockery. He stood before a confluence officiant who performed the ceremony in the common galactic language. One understood only some of it from his training, but he knew when to speak his part. His responses were clear and emotionless. When it was done, they were declared bonded according to confluence law. The guests applauded politely. Several made jokes about humans in voices just loud enough to be heard. His face remained a perfect diplomatic mask. One's did too, though inside he felt something dark and heavy settling in his chest. The reception lasted 4 hours. One stood beside, smiling when appropriate, accepting congratulations from beings who clearly thought this was hilarious. An admiral clapped him on the shoulder. "Brave man, marrying above your station. Let's hope your children have her brains, eh?" The admiral laughed. Others joined in. Said nothing in his defense. She simply smiled and moved the conversation along. When it finally ended, they returned to their residence together for the first time. The silence between them felt heavy and sharp, went immediately to her private quarters. One stood in the common area, still in his uniform, and looked out the window at the alien city beyond. Somewhere out there, Earth was a small blue dot, barely visible even on star charts. He had volunteered to be a soldier for that dot, to defend it, to represent it, to do whatever was necessary. This was necessary. He didn't love, how could he? She had made clear she considered him beneath her, but he would endure this marriage with the same discipline he brought to everything else. If it helped Earth gain respect, if it opened doors for his people, then his personal feelings didn't matter. In her room, sat at her desk and composed a message to her father. "The deed is done. I have married the human. I will maintain appearances as required. Please do not ask more of me than this." She sent it and then sat in the dark, feeling a combination of anger and shame. Anger at her father for forcing this. Shame at herself for not being strong enough to refuse. And underneath it all, a small voice she tried to ignore that whispered, what if she was wrong about humans? What if there was more to one than she assumed? She pushed the thought away. In 3 weeks she would return to her regular life. This marriage would become background noise, a footnote in her biography. The human would stay in his place and she would stay in hers. That's what she told herself as she prepared for bed in a residence she now shared with a stranger from a primitive world. Neither of them knew that war was coming. Neither could imagine how everything was about to change. 6 months passed like a slow river. One and lived in the same residence but existed in different worlds. She left early each morning for her father's offices, managing political affairs and diplomatic relationships. He reported to the Confluence military headquarters, where he worked in a small office reviewing supply reports and logistics data. It was boring work, far below his training and abilities, but it was work that needed doing, and one did it without complaint. His human colleagues back on Earth sent him messages asking how the marriage was going. He lied and said it was fine. Never asked about his day. He never asked about hers. They maintained the arrangement she had demanded, separate lives under one roof. Then the reports started coming in from the outer rim. Ships were disappearing. Colony worlds were going silent. At first, the Confluence Council dismissed it as technical problems or perhaps pirates. But one, reading the incident reports in his small office, saw a pattern. The disappearances were too coordinated, too strategic. When the first distress call came through with actual footage, the galaxy learned the truth. The swarm had returned. They were a nightmare species, numerous beyond counting and controlled by a hive mind that made them terrifyingly efficient in battle. They had been dormant for over a century, and the confluence had grown comfortable, believing the threat was gone forever. They were wrong. The confluence scrambled to respond. Emergency sessions were called. Military fleets were mobilized. One watched from the sidelines as commanders argued about strategy. He was invited to some meetings as a courtesy. He was married to the High Chancellor's daughter after all, but nobody expected him to contribute. In one particular meeting, he sat at the edge of the room while alien admirals debated their defensive plan. They wanted to establish a defensive line at the system, using their numerical superiority to overwhelm any advance. One studied the star charts on the displays. Something bothered him. The system had 3 major gravity wells and 2 asteroid fields. The confluence plan assumed they would attack in a direct assault, but if they were truly controlled by a hive mind. He raised his hand. Several commanders looked at him with surprise. One, a general named Rax, sighed loudly. "Yes, human, do you have something to add?" "The defensive line," one said carefully. "It assumes they will attack head-on, but if they're coordinated by a single intelligence, they could use the asteroid fields to mask their approach and split your forces. You'd be surrounded before you realized it." General Rax snorted. "The asteroids are too dense. No fleet could navigate them safely." "A human fleet couldn't," one admitted. "But the ships are biological, they move differently. They could." "Thank you for your input," Rax interrupted. "But we will proceed with the actual military expert's plan." The other commanders nodded. One sat back down, his jaw tight. He wanted to argue more, to show them the tactical simulations running in his head, but he knew they wouldn't listen. To them, he was just a human. What did he know about real warfare? He spent that night in his quarters, unable to sleep. He ran simulation after simulation on his personal computer, testing his theory. Every scenario ended the same way. If they used the asteroids, the confluence fleet would be destroyed. He thought about sending a report to the High Command, but what would that accomplish? They had already dismissed him once. Came home late that night, looking exhausted. She moved through the common area toward her quarters, barely acknowledging him. Then she paused. "You're still awake," she observed. "Working on something," one replied. She hesitated, and for a moment he thought she might ask what he was working on. Instead, she just said, "Don't stay up too late," and disappeared into her room. 3 days later, the Confluence fleet engaged the system. Was in her father's office when the reports came through. The battle was going as planned for the first hour. The Confluence forces were holding the line, pushing back the attackers. Then everything changed. Ships poured out of the asteroid fields exactly as one had predicted. They hit the Confluence fleet from 3 sides at once. The defensive line collapsed. Ships were torn apart. Thousands died in the first 10 minutes. Watched the tactical displays with growing horror. She heard commanders shouting, heard her father demanding explanations. And suddenly, she remembered sitting in the common area of her residence, seeing one hunched over his computer late at night. She left the office and went home. One was there, standing at the window, watching news feeds on his handheld device. His face was tight with pain. "You knew," said. He turned to her, surprised. "What?" "You knew this would happen. You warned them." "I tried to," he said quietly. "They didn't listen." "Show me," demanded. "Show me what you saw." For the first time since their marriage, they sat down together. One brought up his simulations, walking her through his tactical analysis. Was shocked by the depth of his work, the precision of his predictions. "Why didn't you push harder?" she asked. "You could have gone to my father directly." One laughed bitterly. "Your father, he wouldn't see me, and even if he did, why would he listen? I'm just a human." The words stung because knew they were true. She had thought the same thing herself. The disaster changed everything. The Confluence had lost a third of their fleet. The advance continued. Panic spread through the capital. In desperation, the military command expanded their strategic council, bringing in officers from all member species, including one. This time when he spoke, people listened. He proposed a counter-strategy that used this hive mind against them. If all their ships were controlled by a central intelligence, there would be a communication delay across vast distances. Fast, aggressive strikes could exploit that lag, hitting and retreating before they could coordinate a response. It was risky. It required using older, faster ships that could be spared if lost. The kind of ships humans used, because Earth didn't have anything better. "I'll lead the attack myself," one said. General Rax, who had been humbled by the disaster, nodded slowly. "Do it. You have command of the human contingent and any volunteers from other species." Watched the mission through her father's private command feeds. She saw one small fleet of 12 ships approach a staging area. She saw them strike fast and hard, destroying supply vessels and communication nodes before they could react. She saw them escape just as warships arrived to defend. It worked, and it worked again in the second raid, and the third. One came home after the fifth successful mission looking exhausted but alive. Was waiting in the common area. She had prepared food, both human and dishes, not sure what he would prefer. "I watched your missions," she said as he entered, "all of them." He looked at the food in surprise. "You didn't have to." "Sit," she interrupted, "eat, and tell me about it." They talked for the first time. Really talked. One explained his tactical thinking, drawing on military history from Earth. Was fascinated by the stories of human warfare, Sun's art of war, the strategies of ancient Korean generals, the guerrilla tactics of Earth's countless conflicts. "Your people have been fighting for your entire history," she said. It wasn't an accusation, just an observation. "Yes," one agreed. "It's not something to be proud of, but it taught us things. How to win when you're outnumbered. How to survive when you're outmatched." "Like now," said softly. "Like now," he confirmed. She looked at him across the table, seeing him clearly for the first time. Not as a political burden or a primitive human, but as a soldier who had been right when everyone else was wrong. As a man who volunteered for dangerous missions to protect people who had mocked him. "I owe you an apology," said. "I've been cruel, dismissive. You deserved better." One shook his head. "You were honest. I appreciate that more than false kindness." "Still," she insisted, "I was wrong about you, about humans." He smiled, a real smile this time. "That's all I wanted, for someone to see that we're more than you assumed." They finished their meal together, and for the first time, the residence felt less like a prison and more like a home. Not a happy home yet, but something with potential. Outside, the war continued, but inside, something had shifted between them. Respect had taken root where before there was only obligation. It was a beginning. 1 year into their marriage, one received his promotion to commander. It came with a new assignment, command of a mixed-species battle group. For the first time in Confluence history, a human would lead ships from multiple worlds. The announcement created immediate controversy. Senior officers from the older, more established species protested. How could a human, whose people had barely left their own solar system a generation ago, command their vessels? But one's record spoke for itself. 17 successful missions, 0 ships lost under his command, tactics that had been studied and by military academies across the Confluence. The appointment stood. Celebrated with him that night, opening a bottle of wine that cost more than a month of his salary. They had grown closer over the months, sharing meals regularly now, talking late into the night about everything from military strategy to childhood memories. "My father is furious," said, raising her glass. "He didn't expect this marriage to give you actual power." One clinked his glass against hers. "Is he going to make problems?" "Probably," she admitted. "But I'll handle him. You focus on winning this war." He looked at her, seeing the determination in her eyes. Somewhere along the way, she had stopped being his reluctant wife and become his partner. He wasn't sure exactly when it happened, but he was grateful for it. The next morning, he took command of his battle group, 23 ships from 7 different species. The crews were skilled but skeptical. He could see it in their faces during the first briefing. They would follow orders, but they didn't trust him yet. "I know what you're thinking," one addressed them over the comm system. "You're wondering if I'm qualified to lead you. That's fair. I'm young. I'm human. My people are new to space warfare, but I promise you this, I will never waste your lives. I will never send you into a battle I wouldn't fight myself. And I will bring as many of you home as I can." It wasn't an inspiring speech exactly, but it was honest. And honesty, one had learned, mattered more than grand words. His battle group's first major test came quickly. They were assigned to patrol the outer rim, protecting colony worlds from raids. It was dangerous work, requiring constant vigilance and quick responses. But one's methods created tension. He insisted on running drills daily, practicing maneuvers that seemed strange to his officers. He demanded that ships maintain unusual formations. He questioned standard procedures. A captain named confronted him after 2 weeks. "Commander, with respect, your tactics are unconventional. They deviate from established doctrine." "Established doctrine got a third of our fleet destroyed at," one replied calmly. "We need to think differently." "Or you need to prove you deserve this position," shot back. "Some say you only have this command because of your wife's family." One met his eyes steadily. "Then I'll prove them wrong." The opportunity came sooner than expected. Intelligence reported a major force gathering near the colony world of 4. The planet housed 12 million civilians of various species. High Command ordered a full evacuation. But the numbers didn't work. They didn't have enough transport ships to evacuate everyone before they arrived. At least 3 million people would be left behind. "Then we defend the planet," one said during the command briefing. The Confluence admiral leading the briefing shook his head. "Commander, the force is 3 times the size of your battle group, is indefensible. We evacuate who we can and withdraw." "That's abandoning millions of people to die," one protested. "That's accepting reality," the admiral replied. "I'm sorry, Commander, those are your orders." One ended the comm call and sat in his command chair, thinking. Around him, his bridge crew waited silently. Finally, he activated the ship-wide channel. "This is Commander 1 to all ships. You've heard the orders. We're supposed to help evacuate and then retreat, but I'm going to give you a choice. We can follow those orders and leave millions to die, or we can stay and fight. I won't order anyone to stay. This has to be voluntary. You have 1 hour to decide." In their residence on Prime, received an urgent message from a military contact. One was refusing orders. He was planning to fight a battle he couldn't win. She immediately tried to call him, but he wasn't accepting personal communications. She went to her father instead. High Chancellor listened to her plea with a cold expression. "He's going to get himself killed," said desperately. "You have to order him to retreat." "Why would I do that?" her father asked. "If he dies heroically, he becomes a martyr for human ambition. If he retreats, he's disgraced. Either way, the human problem solves itself." Stared at her father, feeling something break inside her. "He's my husband." "He's a political tool," corrected. "Don't forget that." She left his office and returned home, pulling up every communication channel she had. She began calling in favors, contacting allies, doing everything she could to get one reinforcements or support. Meanwhile, at 4, one received his answers. Every single ship in his battle group voted to stay. Even Captain, who had questioned him, pledged his vessel. "We follow you, Commander," said simply. They arrived like a swarm of locusts, hundreds of bioships, twisted and organic, moving with precision. One's 23 ships positioned themselves in orbit around 4, ready to defend. The battle lasted 72 hours. One used every trick he knew. He divided his forces, making the split their attention. He used the planet's gravity wells to slingshot damaged ships to safety. He feinted retreats, then ambushed pursuing vessels. He fought not like a traditional fleet commander, but like a guerrilla fighter on a massive scale. But they kept coming. Ships were destroyed, crews died. One's battle group was being ground down. On the second day, he led a desperate boarding action against a command vessel, hopping to disrupt their coordination. The fighting inside the alien ship was brutal in close quarters. One fought with a rifle in one hand and a plasma blade in the other, killing warriors that were 3 times his size. They succeeded in destroying the command vessel, but one took a piece of shrapnel to his side. He kept fighting, kept commanding, refusing to leave the bridge even as blood soaked through his uniform. On the third day, when it seemed like all hope was lost, reinforcements arrived. Not from the Confluence military, but from civilian vessels, merchant ships, private yachts, even mining haulers. Had called everyone she could reach, and they had come. It wasn't enough to win, but it was enough to survive. The combined force drove the back long enough to complete the evacuation. Not a single civilian was left behind. When the last transport ship jumped to safety, one finally allowed himself to collapse. His second-in-command caught him as he fell from his chair. He woke up 3 days later in a military hospital on Prime, was sitting beside his bed, looking exhausted. Her eyes were red like she had been crying. "Hey," he said weakly. She grabbed his hand, squeezing hard. "You idiot, you magnificent, stupid idiot." "We saved them," he said. "You almost died," she countered. "Your doctors said you lost so much blood they weren't sure you'd make it." "But I did," he smiled. "I'm harder to kill than I look." She leaned forward, pressing her forehead against his. "Don't you ever do that to me again. Don't you dare." "I can't promise that," he said honestly. "Not while this war continues." "I know," she whispered. "That's what terrifies me." She stayed with him through his recovery, sleeping in the hospital room, barely leaving his side. The staff tried to convince her to go home and rest, but she refused. During those quiet days, they talked more deeply than ever before, about their fears, their hopes, their growing feelings for each other. Admitted that she loved him, though she wasn't sure when it had happened. One confessed that he had been falling for her for months but was afraid to say it. "This wasn't supposed to happen," said. "This marriage was supposed to mean nothing." "I know," one agreed, "but I'm glad it did. I'm glad we found this." News of the Battle of 4 spread across the galaxy. One's desperate defense, his refusal to abandon civilians, his tactical brilliance against overwhelming odds, it all became legendary. Refugees from built a memorial in his honor, calling him their savior. But for one end, the only thing that mattered was lying in that hospital bed, holding hands, finally admitting what they meant to each other. The war was far from over. Harder battles were coming, but they would face them together now, as true partners, bound not by political necessity but by something far stronger. Love forged in the fires of war. 3 years into the war, one stood before the largest military assembly in Confluence history. He wore the uniform of a fleet admiral now, with medals from a dozen different worlds across his chest. Behind him, holographic displays showed the current war situation. The swarm was weakening, but still dangerous. "We've been fighting defensively for too long," he told the assembled commanders. "It's time to take the offensive." His words carried weight now. Soldiers from across the galaxy called him the Unyielding or Earth's Blade. Some species had started treating him with reverence that bordered on religious worship. He had become a legend, whether he wanted to be or not. But with fame came enemies. In the political chambers of Prime, a group of senior Confederation officials met in secret. They represented the Old Guard, species that had dominated galactic politics for centuries, and they were afraid. "He's making humans too powerful," said a senator. "They'll demand equal representation soon, equal resources, equal say in confluence policy." "He's just one human," another argued weakly. "No," High Chancellor spoke up. "He's a symbol, and symbols can change empires." Had watched his daughter transform from a dutiful politician into one's passionate supporter. It ate at him like poison. The marriage he had arranged as a joke was now undermining everything he had worked for. "We need to contain this," said, "before it's too late." He went to that evening. She was at home, reviewing military reports that one had sent her. They consulted on everything now, truly partners in every sense. "We need to talk," said, entering without announcement. Looked up surprised. "Father, I didn't expect you." "That's clear," he said coldly, gesturing at the military documents. "You're playing at being a general now, forgetting who you really are." "I'm helping my husband," replied evenly. "Something you should appreciate since you arranged this marriage." "I arranged a political gesture," snapped. "Not a love story, not this. Partnership that's threatening the entire power structure of the confluence." Stood up facing her father. "Is that what this is about? You're afraid of what one represents." "I'm afraid of what happens when humans get ideas above their station," said. "And I'm here to give you a choice, daughter. Denounce him. Publicly distance yourself from his growing influence. Help us contain the human expansion. Or what?" challenged. "Or you will no longer be my daughter," said quietly. "You'll be cast out from society, stripped of your title, your inheritance, everything." The silence stretched between them. Thought about her entire life, the privileges she had enjoyed, the respect of her people, the future she had always assumed would be hers. Then she thought about about watching him recover from near death at 4, about late nights spent talking until dawn, about the way he looked at her like she was the most important person in the galaxy. "I choose him," said. His face went rigid with shock. "You would throw away your entire life for a human." "I'm not throwing anything away," replied. "I'm choosing what matters. If you can't see that, then maybe I was never really your daughter at all." She walked past him, gathering her belongings. Stood frozen, unable to believe what was happening. "You'll regret this," he called after her. Paused at the door. "The only thing I regret is not choosing him sooner." When one returned from a military conference that night, told him everything. He listened quietly, then pulled her into his arms. "You didn't have to do that," he said softly. "Yes, I did," she replied. "You taught me that some things are worth fighting for." The news of his break with her father spread like wildfire through political channels. Some applauded her courage. Others saw it as scandal. But the impact was undeniable. The marriage that was supposed to keep humans in their place had become a symbol of defiance against the old order. Then they made their final, desperate move. Intelligence reported that the entire remaining swarm was converging on a single target, Prime itself. The Confederation capital had never been directly threatened in its 1,000-year history. Panic gripped the government. Evacuation plans were drawn up. Some officials argued for abandoning the planet entirely. One requested an emergency meeting with the Confluence High Council. When he entered the chamber, the room fell silent. Every eye was on him. "Give me supreme command of all Confluence forces," he said without preamble. "Complete tactical authority, and I will save this world." The debate lasted for hours, but in the end fear won out over pride. They gave him what he asked for. One spent the next week in near-constant work, barely sleeping. He commanded fleets from 3 solar systems, coordinating the largest military operation in galactic history. He drew on strategies from ancient Earth, Sun, principles of deception, the tactical flexibility of Korean naval commanders, the defensive genius of human history's greatest generals. Worked beside him, managing communications and political coordination. They operated as a perfect team, anticipating each other's needs, supporting each other through the stress and exhaustion. When they arrived, they came with everything they had left. Thousands of bioships, all converging on Prime in a final, all-or-nothing assault. One didn't meet them head-on. Instead, he staged what looked like a retreat, pulling the Confederation fleet back. Thus sensing victory, pursued aggressively, right into a trap spanning 3 solar systems. Mines destroyed their forward elements. Long-range missiles hammered their flanks. And when they tried to retreat, they found their escape routes blocked by reinforcements one had positioned days earlier. The Battle of Prime lasted for 18 hours. It was brutal, desperate, and costly. But slowly, systematically, one dismantled the swarm. The final act came when he led a personal assault on the Queenship, the massive vessel that housed the hive mind controlling the entire swarm. It was suicide mission territory, but one had learned long ago that some things were worth dying for. He took a team of volunteers, the best fighters from a dozen species. They breached the Queenship's hull and fought through hordes of warriors. The combat was savage in close quarters, more like ancient warfare than space battles. One fought like a man possessed. He had spent 3 years studying learning their weaknesses, understanding their biology. Now he put that knowledge to use, leading his team deeper into the ship. They reached the Queen Chamber, where the massive Queen coordinated her swarm. She was enormous, terrifying, and protected by her most elite warriors. The battle that followed would be talked about for generations. One personally fought his way through the guards and confronted the Queen. Using plasma charges and precision tactics, he brought down the creature that had terrorized the galaxy. With the Queen dead, the hive mind collapsed. Across 3 solar systems, ships suddenly lost coordination. They became easy targets, destroyed by Confederation forces that had been waiting for exactly this moment. The war was over. One emerged from the Queenship covered in blood and burns, barely able to stand. His team carried him back to the medical ships. When news spread that he had killed the Queen personally, something changed in how the galaxy saw him. He wasn't just a commander anymore, he was something more. A warrior beyond normal understanding, a legend made flesh. The victory celebration on Prime drew billions of beings from across the Confederation. One stood before them, uncomfortable with the attention, but understanding its necessity. Stood beside him, holding his hand, her head held high. She had given up everything for this moment, for this man, and she had no regrets. Speech, the crowd chanted, speech. One raised his hand for silence. I'm no god, he said simply. I'm just a soldier who did his duty. The real heroes are the ones who didn't come home. Remember them, honor them, and build a future worthy of their sacrifice. That night alone in their quarters, one and finally let themselves rest. They lay together, exhausted but alive, the war finally over. What do we do now? Asked quietly. Whatever comes next, one replied, together. She smiled and kissed him. Together, she agreed. Outside, the galaxy celebrated. The god of war had saved them all. But inside their room, one was just a man holding the woman he loved, grateful to have survived long enough to see peace. 5 years after the marriage that changed the galaxy, one stood in a conference room facing the Confluence High Council. He wore civilian clothes now, simple and comfortable. The war had been over for 2 years, but its effects still rippled through society. You're requesting retirement, the council chairman asked, looking surprised. "Admiral, you're only 33 years old. You could lead our military for decades." "That's exactly why I'm retiring," one replied calmly. "The confluence needs leaders who aren't defined by war. I've been a soldier since I was 18. It's time for me to be something else." The council members exchanged uncertain glances. Humanity now held 3 seats on the High Council, equal representation with the older species. Earth had become a major player in galactic politics, and it was all because of the man standing before them. "What will you do?" another council member asked. "Go home," one said simply. "To Earth with my wife, live a normal life." That evening, he told about the council's response. They had approved his retirement, though reluctantly. They were also nomming a military academy after him on Prime, where future officers would study his tactics. "How do you feel?" asked, pouring them both tea, a human custom she had grown to love. "Relieved," one admitted. "I'm tired of making decisions that cost lives, tired of being treated like I'm more than human." She took his hand. "You are human. That's what makes everything you did so remarkable." They had discussed returning to Earth many times over the past year, was nervous about it. Earth was one's home, but it would be completely alien to her. She would be the outsider there, just as he had been on Prime. "Are you sure about this?" one asked gently. "You gave up everything for me already. I don't want you to feel." "I'm sure," interrupted. "Where you go, I go. That's what we promised each other." The journey to Earth took 2 weeks on a civilian transport. It was strange for one to travel without military escort, without constant briefings and tactical updates. He spent the time reading, talking with, and trying to remember what it felt like to be ordinary. When they arrived, Earth greeted them with massive celebrations. One was a hero here, the human who had proven to the galaxy that Earth deserved respect. Parades were held in major cities. The government wanted to give him medals and appointments. But one declined it all. He had settled in a small house outside Seoul, near the mountains where he had grown up. It was quiet, peaceful, and wonderfully normal. Struggled at first. Earth's gravity was heavier than she was used to. The food was different. The customs were unfamiliar. But one helped her adapt, just as she had helped him adapt to Prime years ago. "It's funny," she said one evening as they walked through a traditional Korean market. "I used to think humans were primitive, but there's such richness here, such history." "We're good at some things," one smiled, "and terrible at others, just like every species." They faced challenges from unexpected directions. Some humans resented, seeing her as a symbol of the aliens who had looked down on humanity for so long. A few extremist groups even protested outside their home, demanding that one divorce her and marry a proper human woman. One's response was public and firm. "My wife stood by me when her own people cast her out. She gave up everything to support me and Earth. Anyone who disrespects her disrespects me, and I won't tolerate that from anyone." The protests stopped after that. A year after returning to Earth, discovered she was pregnant. The news shocked them both. Human hybrids were theoretically possible, but there had never been one before. Medical experts from both species descended on them, offering advice and monitoring. Gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl. They had characteristics of both species, human facial features with pale, shimmering skin. They would grow up belonging to 2 worlds, symbols of what was possible when species came together. One held his children and felt something he had never experienced before, pure, uncomplicated joy. No tactical considerations, no duty to fulfill, just love for his family. "What should we name them?" asked, exhausted but smiling. They chose names from both cultures. Jin for their son, meaning precious in Korean. For their daughter, a traditional name meaning starlight. As the children grew, won and found new purpose. They were approached by universities and military academies across the galaxy, asking them to teach. Not just tactics and strategy, but about bridge building between species, about overcoming prejudice, about partnership. They accepted, traveling occasionally to give lectures and seminars. But they always returned to Earth, to their quiet home, to the simple life they had chosen. One's mother visited often, doting on her. She and had grown close, bonded by their love for the same man and their shared experience of watching him nearly die for his beliefs. "I was so angry when you accepted that marriage," his mother told him one afternoon while the children played in the garden. "I thought they were using you." "They were," one agreed. "But you turned it into something beautiful," she continued. You showed everyone that we're all just people underneath everything else." On the 5th anniversary of the war's end, the Confluence held a memorial ceremony on Prime. One was invited as the guest of honor. He almost declined, but convinced him to go. "People need to remember," she said, "and you need to say goodbye properly." The memorial was a massive structure made of crystal and metal, inscribed with the names of every soldier who had died in the war. Millions of names from dozens of species. One stood before it, reading names he recognized: friends, subordinates, brave souls who had followed him into battle. When it was time for him to speak, he kept it simple. "We won the war," he said to the assembled crowd. "But victory always costs more than we want to pay. These names represent sons and daughters, parents and children, friends and lovers. They gave everything so we could stand here today. The only way to honor them is to build a galaxy worthy of their sacrifice. A galaxy where species work together instead of looking down on each other. A galaxy where a marriage like mine isn't unusual, it's just a marriage." The crowd was silent, reflecting on his words. Afterward, High Chancellor approached. He looked older, diminished somehow. The war had changed him too. "One," he said formally, "may I speak with you?" They followed him to a private room, stood uncomfortably, clearly struggling with what he wanted to say. "I was wrong," he finally said, looking at his daughter. "About everything, about humans, about this marriage, about you." He turned to one. "You proved to be a better man than I ever imagined, and you made my daughter happier than any political marriage I could have arranged." His eyes filled with tears. "Father, I'm not asking for forgiveness," continued. "I know I don't deserve it, but I wanted you both to know I'm proud of what you've accomplished, of what you represent." It wasn't a full reconciliation. Too much had happened for that. But it was a beginning, a crack in the wall that had separated them. Years passed. Jin and grew into remarkable young people, comfortable in both human and society. They represented the future one and had fought for a galaxy where differences were celebrated rather than used to divide. One taught occasionally at the academy that bore his name, sharing his experiences with eager young officers. But mostly, he gardened, read, spent time with his family, and enjoyed the peace he had helped create. On the 10th anniversary of their marriage, one sat on their porch watching the sunset over the Korean mountains. Their children were inside, arguing good-naturedly about something trivial. "Do you ever regret it?" one asked quietly, "giving up your old life?" Laughed, "Are you serious? I got you our children and I helped change the galaxy. What's there to regret?" "I just want to make sure you're happy," he said. She took his hand, intertwining their fingers. "That marriage your government arranged. It was supposed to be a burden, a sacrifice. Instead, it gave me everything I ever wanted, even things I didn't know I wanted." "Same," he agreed softly. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped below the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Centuries later, historians would study this era. They would analyze the war, dissect one's tactics, debate the political implications of humanity's rise. Entire courses would be taught about the marriage between a human officer and an aristocrat. But for one end, sitting on their porch watching the sunset, the story was simpler than that. It was the story of two people who started as strangers, became partners, and ended as something rare and precious. Two souls who found each other across the void of space and decided that love was worth more than pride or prejudice or power. The god of war had won his greatest battle not through tactics or courage, but through choosing love when it would have been easier to choose duty alone. And in the end, that was the legacy that mattered most.